Alright everybody, so in today's video, can you make money Ubering along the beach? So on this day I had to get to the beach, which means I took a ride from Lakewood Ranch to the airport in Sarasota. And right when I left the airport in Sarasota, I picked up another ride from the airport that took me to Holmes Beach, Anna Maria Island. So the goal of today's trip was basically to hang out by the beach and pick up Uber drives along the water, cool beach vibes. But is it profitable? Can you actually get paid to hang out by the beach using Uber? That was the goal of today's video. So the first two rides, one was a $13 ride. This one took me from Lakewood Ranch to the airport. Interestingly enough, as soon as I turned on my app, there was a person like less than a mile from my house who needed to go to the Sarasota airport. That's how we got here by the airport. Then I picked up another ride, which went from Sarasota Airport to the beach. Unfortunately, that first ride was a $13 ride, and they didn't tip me. And I think, they should have tipped me. But the person that I picked up from the airport going to the beach was $27. So we're going to start counting there. I'm going to say the first ride doesn't really count because that was just getting me to the general area. But that ride from the airport to the beach does count. The girl gave me a $5 tip and it dropped me off in Holmes Beach. Now the GPS took me to West Bradenton. Nice little area here. You can see it's kind of residential. And of course, the worst part about this trip is the traffic. As you guys know, when you get on that causeway heading to the islands, traffic can be a nightmare. Now, it wasn't really bad along this stretch, but you'll see further ahead how bad traffic got heading towards the beach. But hey, with the tip included, when we drop this person off, we're going to be $27 into this. So I basically was able to hitchhike to the beach with $27 in my pocket. That is hard to beat. Now, the passenger had a flight that got canceled or something like that. Can't really remember. But either way, it was a failed trip. And I'm just taking her back to Holmes Beach. And she sat in the front seat and she wanted to talk. And it made it a very enjoyable, pleasant trip. Sometimes females are a little bit shy. They don't want to talk. They sit in the back seat, but this girl was talkative. She sat in the front. We had a great conversation, and it really made time pass by quickly, which was great because further ahead, we're going to get caught in some pretty crappy and typically expected beach congestion. I guess the fact she tipped me $5 made a difference because we were stuck quite a while trying to get on Anna Maria Island. It's usually bumper to bumper, and this wasn't even the worst. I mean, sometimes it starts 5 miles behind us, but once we got to about this point here, traffic was moving a little bit better, and either way, getting onto the islands is a nightmare in Bradenton because there's only 2 bridges and a lot of people that want to be on the beach. So Bradenton Beach is really congested. Unlike Sarasota, they actually have an actual causeway. I'm talking 2 lanes each way to get on and off their islands, so you don't have to deal with this crap. But apparently, Bradenton, Florida can't afford the same good things that Sarasota has, so we're stuck in traffic. I really do think that there needs to be another bridge to Longboat Key somewhere in the middle because the congestion here is unreal, or at least something connecting West Bradenton, Palmasola to Anna Maria on the north side of the island. It may not be aesthetically pretty, but it needs to happen. We need another bridge. This is absolutely ridiculous. But the goal of today's video really is to get me on the island where I can just drive tourists around. I went through a few night routes and bad neighborhoods, and it was absolutely scary. I was even thinking about quitting Uber because I'm like, I'm probably going to die doing this. So I'm figuring, let me try to find a more positive vibe routine. It probably won't pay as well, but at least I'm not going to die. Even if it doesn't pay as well, wouldn't you rather spend your day on the beach with fun touristy type people versus in scary neighborhoods where you don't know if you're going to die or not? I mean, chances are you're not going to be murdered on the beach by a passenger. It more likely happen in West Bradenton or South Bradenton for sure, but not here. I don't think it would happen on the beach. I hope not. But the idea was, despite the congestion, despite the fact that the rides are probably going to be short, most rides that I got were people trying to leave the island. So that made it a little complicated because I had to pass up on a lot of people leaving the island to the airport, which are actually pretty profitable rides. So I guess the downside of my theory of hanging out on the beach all day is that in reality, I had to pass up on a lot of good rides, people heading to the airport. So if you're on a money-making scheme, this definitely wasn't it. But here we are picking up our second person for the day that is included in today's trip. It's really the third person of the day, but we're going to say it's the second person of the day because, like I said, we're only going to count the ones on the beach. That one from Lakewood Ranch to here didn't really count. Now, I got my person en route still from the first trip. I know I got a second trip coming up after that. I usually don't do that. I just like to finish the one trip because there could actually be something better if you just wait. This whole taking a trip before you finish the other one, don't like doing it. Ran into this nightmare of a situation. They're fixing the roads here, and you know, there's only a few ways to get around the island, and they're working on construction, so it kind of frustrated our trip trying to figure out if I should be, you know, driving over roads that are closed to get that person dropped off. You gotta be real careful on the beach because there's always people on bicycles, and I'll be honest, most of the time they are not paying attention, and many times they are BUI, biking under the influence. So you gotta be really careful driving on the islands with bikers, people. A lot of times they're just not paying attention. Like, see here how I slow down just in case, because you just never know on the island. Speed limit on this island is also like 25 miles an hour, so you're not going to really fly through this island very quickly. Well, if you think about it, it's actually quite impractical to Uber on the island because there's so much traffic and there's so many traffic bottlenecks throughout the island that you'll spend a lot of your time just sitting like a duck. It takes a lot of patience being on the island with pedestrians as well. So yeah, it's not exactly a fast money-making scheme out here. But even if it's not the most productive day monetarily, I mean, come on, being able to spend your day on the beach and still getting paid for it, even though it's not the highest paying route, come on, every once in a while you gotta do it, you know? I took the day mostly to hang around the beaches and just between rides taking very long breaks to hang out on the beach. So it was kind of more like an unwind day and at the same time making some money. So it's kind of like a very just casual way of making some money without too much complications or headaches. And again, you get to be on the island either way. I mean, these islands are so beautiful that even if you're riding people around in a setting like this, you could almost forget you're working sometimes. Even though I spent a lot of time sitting idle, looking at the water and just hanging out there waiting for something to happen, I'm going to be honest, it was pretty idle throughout the day. I mean, the rides going from the island to somewhere in the island were almost non-existent. Most were people trying to get off the island or people from West Bradenton trying to get back on the island, which really didn't make a lot of sense. Positioning yourself on the other side of a bottleneck of traffic isn't really the most practical thing you could do on Uber. So it made sense to me, at least, to just wait for somebody within the island that needed a ride. And again, those trips are very scarce, predominantly because there's a trolley service that takes people from one point of the island to the other for free. And it takes only the most impatient people who don't want to wait for the trolley that's free to end up getting a Uber, which may actually come after the trolley if they're not sure when it's coming. So in that regards, even the people that use my Uber service were kind of almost self-admittedly embarrassed that despite the fact they could have got a ride for free, they decided to be impatient and use my service. So that in itself is kind of, well, it defeats the purpose because there is a free trolley service on Anna Maria Island, which means that it doesn't really lend itself very well to Uber driving from one point of the island to the other when you can just do it for free. So that is definitely one of the question marks about this situation, that why would you pay somebody when you can do it for free? Now, I'm not going to say every beach area in Florida has these particular circumstances, but at least in the Bradenton area, it absolutely does not make sense to try to Uber on the island because of the mentioned things: traffic bottlenecks, Most people are getting off the island, and then you have the obvious that it's free, so why would you pay? But either way, I wanted to hang out on the island, and if a ride came along, I was going to take it. So I did the most practical thing, which was just to park my vehicle and go sit on a bench near the water and wait for that phone to ring. So eventually I did get a notification. Somebody was going from a bar to a Publix, so we picked them up. I was excited to finally get a trip. Now this only paid $7 and it was going to take me 16 minutes. So really, you're hoping that with the traffic bottleneck on the island, once you try to get back into the main area of the island, that they're going to tip you. The problem was that these 3 females did not tip me. Thus, now a 16-minute ride doesn't sound bad until you realize that most of it was sitting bumper to bumper, and I think that they quite literally could have walked there quicker because traffic was really crappy. And of course, you also have kids and bicycles and pedestrians, and you just have to pay a lot of attention. So it seems like the chances of something going wrong here, like, you know, dealing with pedestrians, riding a bicycle in front of you or something, it really isn't the most convenient place, I'll tell you. As far as being on the beach all day was nice, but the whole actual process of trying to Uber on this island really didn't make any sense at all. Alright, so this is the place where I had to pick up these 3 females. There really wasn't even a place to park. It was just a really congested little area, and then I had these people on the golf cart who were wondering what I was doing, why I was parked there, so it kind of, yeah, it's always weird. So my passengers on board, I can't emphasize enough how gruelingly slow this process of getting from point A to point B on this island is. It really seems like it takes forever. And there's people everywhere that you can run over and people that are not sober. It really is a huge inconvenience getting on and off this island, and moving around from point A to point B takes a lot longer than you would want it to take. So overall, despite the fact that being on the beach seemed like a fun idea, I will emphasize that 1, I didn't make a lot of money. 2, they didn't really tip all that well. And 3, it was just actually more a nightmare than enjoyment. You would think that being on the beach island all day would be kind of fun or enjoyable, but in reality, it was just kind of a headache after a while. It didn't really seem like this is a type of trip I would want to repeat, even just for being on the beach, which was my idea, which was, okay, let's see if I can just get paid to be on the beach all day. But it just turned into sitting in traffic along the beach all day. Sounds like a genuinely good idea, but for all practical applications, it didn't really work out the way I thought it would. So we sit in traffic for about 16 minutes, bumper to bumper, bringing our total for this trip to just under $7. Definitely not worth it. And then there's the envious looks from single guys when they realize you got 3 girls in the car and they don't realize you're an Uber driver. They think you're just one lucky guy with 3 girls. That's not really how life works, buddy. It's just interesting. Like, they wanted the windows down because they're obviously having a great time. And every time a guy would see us, he would give me like this really hard look, like, man, you're hoarding all the women to yourself. I'm like, you don't know I'm an Uber driver and I'm barely getting paid for this. Now, when I finally decided to take a break on Manatee Beach, I kid you not, it took about 20 minutes of waiting to get a parking spot. But that's great news because a ride for $3.86 arose, and it only took me 8 minutes of driving this person, plus the time it took to drive there, which was considerable because, again, we are now in the bottleneck in the middle of the island. So here I am heading to find this person to make these $3.86. And at this point, I'm really scratching my head wondering what I'm doing with enough money for 15 miles. I get 15 miles to the gallon, probably less than that in bumper-to-bumper traffic. So this person's giving me enough money for 1 gallon of fuel, and I have to drive roughly 4 miles to get to them, which means that I'm really making only enough money to drive another 10 miles down the road for having a complete stranger hang out in my car. Luckily, the people were pretty cool, and secondly, the people actually gave me a cash tip, which offset this whole thing. I can't remember how much the cash tip was because I didn't look at it, but it was probably more than the $3 their fare paid. And I ended up having to give it to a homeless person on the beach either way, so I don't think that money ever existed. So I'm not gonna lie, what's allegedly a good idea of going to the beach and just picking up rides here and there might have sounded great on paper, but in practice, it was starting to turn into somewhat of a nightmare of sitting in traffic endlessly and wondering if these people don't tip me, I'm barely making enough money for gas here. On top of that, the passengers positioned themselves in a spot where I couldn't get them on the side street. They kind of looked at me and refused to walk across the street, which meant that I had to park my truck right here, blocking the bike lane. And sure enough, when it was time for me to leave, bicycles came and they kind of were very angry at me because I was blocking the bike lane, but the passengers left me no other option. Here I am cutting off the bicycles. They definitely were not happy, but I didn't want to risk getting hit by them, so I kind of rushed out in the road in front of them. But again, the passenger could have walked on the other side of the road where there was ample parking. I parked on the other side of the road, kind of like, hey, can you please walk over here? Because there's nowhere to park on the other side of the road. They kind of refused to walk, making me park somewhere that wasn't really a parking spot. That's kind of the most awkward parking situation I've had so far. I really feel like they should pay more money on the island. I mean, it's a tourist destination. It takes forever to get on and off the island, and there's always traffic congestion. Why they don't have kind of a more expensive fare to be on the island, I don't really understand. I feel like places like this, you should just automatically assume that they should be paying more money and that a $3 ride wouldn't show up in a place like this. I really feel like for some reason or another, all that would contribute to the island paying more money, but it doesn't seem like it's the case. So we're dropping the customer off at this bar right here on the left, and they wanted me to just stop on the middle of the road. I'm like, yeah, I can't really stop in the middle of the road, but I can park in the back of the restaurant where it's safe, if they'll let me through. They didn't want to let me through. So now I'm blocking in traffic. All right, let me through, and I had to convince them not to try to hop out. And the person left the door open when they got out of the car, which means that I had to get out of the car and close the door for them because apparently they were either too drunk or too entitled to close their own door. But yeah, these people, for a few dollars, sure had a lot of demands and expectations, including that I literally closed the door for them since they couldn't figure out that when you get out of a vehicle, you can't just leave the door wide open, which is possibly what they would have done in the middle of the road if I had agreed to what they wanted, which was to stop in the middle of the road. But nonetheless, they were very nice and friendly. I just think maybe they had too much to drink and couldn't figure out how to do things right, which is okay on an island beach. Nothing wrong with that. This is where you're supposed to behave like this. So at this point, I was kind of worn out of dealing with people, so I headed back to the north side of the island to hang out by the beach for a little bit more and unwind, which was ultimately the goal of coming to the island. And by this time of day, you get a lot of people that are on the island that need to catch a flight in Sarasota or St. Petersburg Airport. So I'm getting notifications that pay like $40 to take somebody to the Tampa airport. Of course, the problem isn't getting to the Tampa airport. It's the fact that once you get there, then you have to drive back through Tampa traffic at rush hour, which is never worth it. I kind of wonder, these people that get an Uber ride from Holmes Beach with the intentions of going to the Tampa airport in the afternoon, how many of those people are actually going to find an Uber driver willing to do that? Because yeah, you're driving all the way to the Tampa airport, but then you're stuck in Tampa during rush hour. That doesn't make any sense. So I did notice a few people wanting to go in that direction, but I definitely skipped on them. So for the rest of the day, I hung out by the beach and I left the app open, and I'm waiting for a notification for somebody whose ultimate intention is to head towards East Bradenton Lakewood Ranch area, or at least somewhere close to town so I can get back to the house and have the fuel be on them. But it took a lot longer than expected. But it did eventually happen. I picked up a passenger here by the beach. This is one of the many beach parking spots that we have. This ride was to a residential area in Bradenton. It was a $14 ride, and they did not tip. Now, I sometimes understand when people don't live in the most expensive residential area and they don't tip or they tip very little, because I understand, hey, you know, they're just getting from point A to point B. I can totally understand if I was in Bradenton and I couldn't afford, you know, having a car, whatever the situation, maybe wanting to go to the beach and not being able to tip for the Uber driver. I get it, okay? And it made sense for me to hitch this ride. But this is the second time today that I'm going, you know, a pretty good distance and not getting a tip. And I'm having to say, I hate to say this, but you know, you do make your conclusions about what type of people tip and what type of people don't tip. And it seems like if you're picking up a young female, you're almost guaranteed not to get a tip. I don't know what makes young females think that the world is having to bend over for them and give them free rides and they don't have to tip anywhere they go. But no, you're no different than anybody else. There's no particular reason why you are exempt from having to tip people. Top of that, you can't even start a normal conversation with them, because if you do, they think you're trying to move on to them. So then most of the time you end up not talking to them at all, which makes for a very awkward ride. So I'm going to say young females definitely on the bottom of my list of priorities of customers I want to deal with, because it becomes into a situation where they are awkward and then usually they don't tip. I don't know how weird, creepy, and awkward some of these other Uber drivers are with female passengers, but I got a wife at home. The last thing I need is another liability, so I'm definitely not interested. I'm just trying to get you from point A to point B. Can you at least freaking tip me and not make me feel like I'm being awkward when I haven't done anything awkward? So when it comes to young females, I usually don't break the ice. If they don't want to talk, they won't have anybody to talk to. If they want to talk, they can talk their heads off. Sometimes they talk more than I'd want to be interested in hearing. But at the end of the day, there is an awkwardness about getting in a stranger's car and, of course, respecting people's space and all that. I do the best that I can not to be awkward, but I guess if you've had other awkward experiences, you're just going to assume that I'm awkward even when I'm not. So here we are entering the beautiful city of Bradenton. Of course, because you have to respect people's privacy, I can't tell you exactly where I dropped this person off, but I will tell you one detail about the place where I dropped the person off. It was in front of a memorial for somebody who was killed, so that's very unfortunate. And it definitely looked like a really rough inner city neighborhood. But hey, it gave me $14 of fuel for the day, and it put me back heading towards the house, further inland and away from the beaches. And this was the last ride that I took on this day, bringing the total to about $60 for what I would consider one of the most unproductive days I've had so far Ubering. I would say in the future, when I want to Uber and have a good time, instead of seeking a particular location that I think is enjoyable, I'm going to consider experiences that are enjoyable, like driving people from the beaches to resorts and stuff like that, or from resorts to the airport, and where the experience is enjoyable, but not so much about the place, because it seems like if you just narrow your mind to I'm going to Uber in one particular place, you're limiting yourself seriously on the money side, and then you're stuck with somewhat of an undesirable client base that sometimes doesn't tip very well.